Thank you, and thank you everybody for joining tonight. Tonight's our webinar from Label Launch, all about your fashion label needs. Obviously, Label Launch is a company that's here to help and assist through our mentoring and consultancy programs with our clients, helping you to start your label, to create your label, to progress your label, to sustain your label. So that's what we're all about. And tonight's webinar is going to be talking about offshore versus local production. I've had a few questions come in about that, and I know that's always seems to be such a big dilemma for most people, and rightly so. It's a very big step in the process of creating your label, is choosing the correct suppliers, the correct manufacturers, so you know that your garments are going to be made exactly how you want it, that you've got a trusting relationship with them, that you can achieve the right costs and budgets and within the right timeline. So it's a very important part of the process. One of the biggest questions is, should I pursue local production, manufacturing, or should I look at offshore? My answer to that question would be, it depends really on your label and what you're producing. There is a manufacturing component within Australia. It's very small. It was obviously much bigger 50, 60 years ago, and it's slowly dwindled down with the cost of living and the cost of wages increasing, and with the onset of Asia coming into the industry. So we have a bit of a dilemma with that. There is an industry in Australia that's not as big as what it was, but I have a funny feeling it's going to be a growing industry. Couple of reasons why that would be. One, China now is getting very hard to manufacture with lower MOQs, lower minimum order quantities. It's a very big commitment to meet some of these, especially for a startup label. So with the onset of that, there's a lot of my clients especially are looking for small manufacturers that will do smaller runs. So there are other countries besides China that will look at doing smaller MOQs. And again, with each factory and with each supplier, you need to do your due diligence. Countries such as India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka are opening up and doing smaller MOQs, which suits much better the Australian label as a startup. We just don't have the population really initially in the beginning stages to commit to too many pieces. So it is a concern, and it is something that you need to weigh up. I think the other thing is that then you need to look at the cost involved within Australia. So part of your research and development is really about looking at that. I don't dismiss Australia at all, but I think you need to, like working overseas, you need to do your due diligence and visit the factories, get some costings, see the steps along the way and what you have to do. With my clients, we look at all the components, the difference between Australia versus New Zealand. Oh, sorry, that too, but the difference between Asia versus Australia in manufacturing is that usually when you work with someone in the Asian realm, it's a one-stop shop. So when you're looking at getting a garment made, that factory is usually able to find the fabric for you, cut the fabric, print the fabric, sew your garment, create your labels and package, which is a very big plus when you're coming to manufacturing. So if you do all the detailed work prior, and that's also including probably to go and visit that factory, you can get everything done that you want. That's the difference between Australia and Asia manufacturing. With Australian manufacturing, you have to do all those components, or you have to find virtually all the components to make that garment. So you would have to find all the trims. You would have to source the fabric and purchase the fabric yourself. You, at times, depending on where you live and the manufacturing company that you use, you would have to find cutters and printers, and then physically take those cut and printed pieces to the manufacturer to get made. So it's all very doable, but it's a bit of a much more hands-on process for you as a label owner to be able to get all those pieces done. And sorry, I'm submitting, and manufactured as a whole. So it's something you really need to consider. If you're very hands-on in your label and you've got time and it's very important for you to get it right, then I would definitely suggest looking at Australia first and seeing what you can get. There are trims companies in Australia that you can purchase trims from. There are fabric companies in Australia that you can purchase fabrics from. There are pattern makers, there are cutters, there are manufacturers, there are printers, screen printers and digital printers. But it's quite a long process for you to get all those pieces together and get them into the manufacturing factory and get those made. All along the way, you're going to have to check the components, costing components, because each one of those will have a costing component, which you'll need to be able to budget for and add into all your specifications. Only then will you be able to ascertain whether that cost will be workable for you in either in a direct sales or a or something's just come up that I've got to click my URL. Sorry guys. Oh yeah, I'm on. It's all good. So once you've got all those costings, then you can ascertain whether it's going to be feasible or not for you to manufacture in Australia, or not. I think the simpler the garment is going to be easier for you to do that. A higher end garment that you're going to demand in the higher echelon of price point is a possibility. And even swimwear is possible. We've got great swim fabric companies here. We can print swimwear fabric and activewear, obviously when I'm saying swim and active. And we've got manufacturers here as well. So there is that possibility of even doing swimwear and activewear in Australia. And there are companies that do it. So I wouldn't rule it out. I think it's something that you have to look at the numbers versus the cost. So it would be probably a smart idea to, once you've got all your specifications together of your garment and how you want it manufactured, even the pattern or your components, and do a costing manufacturing in Australia. So hopefully, as we get further into lots of labels opening and the smaller community orientated purchasing power of the public and supporting smaller labels, more manufacturing will open up in Australia. But I think just due to the fact of our hourly rate, which is completely understandable, and as you know, living in Australia, we need to meet that, it will always be slightly more expensive. Another advantage probably of manufacturing in Australia, and what I'm finding manufacturing out of Bali, is they are working in Australian dollars, which is great. So at the moment, a lot of my clients working out of China are feeling the pinch because our dollar, obviously, against the American dollar is really low at the moment. So China always works in US dollar, and that we have to take that into account as well. So that's the difference in the price point. Could also be slightly prohibitive. So that's a few of the advantages and disadvantages of offshore working local. If you have any questions, please fire away, or I'll just keep talking. No, we're all good. Okay. So there was a question about, are there printers in Australia? Can you get your fabric printed in Australia? Yes, you can. There are digital printers, there are screen printers, so that's also a great possibility of doing that. So you can use those. Companies around Australia, they understand the Australian market, so they would have smaller MOQs as well that you could work with. You would just have to obviously have all the components in your artwork and your finished artwork to be able to do that. So as I was saying before, when you're working offshore, it tends to be a one-stop shop. So they may not have their own printers in their factory, but they work with a printer. So it's up to you to have that print ready if you're manufacturing offshore. So you need to work with the factory and find out, or make sure you understand the difference between different types of printing, your screen print, your digital print, your sublimation, your digital printing. Digital printing now is a great help because you can achieve smaller MOQs. Price is a little bit higher, but that's fantastic that there's, you know, something like 100 meters that you can probably print on, which is great. And if you put that over several styles, that can certainly help. Also, when you're manufacturing and you're committing to that type of MOQ and it's still quite high for you, you can invest the cost in getting that fabric printed. You don't have to manufacture all that. So you can, at one stage, maybe you only need 50 meters to do your small range. So then you've still got 50 meters. Okay, you've paid for it, but you're not paying for the manufacturing costs. So you work on your first collection, and then you know that you're going to get repeat sales. Then you've got fabric sitting there, which is great, so that they can turn around and make that reasonably quickly for you. So that's also an option. Like I was saying, there's great screen printers in Australia. I've been working with a young streetwear designer, and we're working with local screen printers, screen printing all his t-shirts, and they're looking fabulous. So he can do smaller MOQs with them and also change the designs pretty quickly, which is what he wants to do. Cost is higher, but he's using premium t-shirts and the prints are unique. So that's what makes the cost of the t-shirt higher and warrant a higher cost. So that would also be something that you would need to make sure that when you're manufacturing in Australia, that your price point, if it's higher, then it's definitely because you're manufacturing in Australia and you've got the quality and the workmanship and the uniqueness of your garment. So that would warrant a higher price point. China obviously has the biggest manufacturing really out of all the countries offshore. But like I said earlier, there's smaller countries that are popping up that will look at doing smaller MOQs. My understanding is the other Asian countries like Korea, Thailand, Vietnam are getting quite busy and are doing higher MOQs now. I think with the regulations in China now that they've had to really come up to meet the criteria for ethically produced garments in an ethical environment, so looking after their workers, that there's been a lot of extra costs added into the factory costs. So I've noticed over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, the costs in China have definitely gone up. And I think this is because the standards of the factories have had to come in line, which is a good thing. I mean, we now know that when you do manufacture in places like China, that their factories are well regulated, and there's not the horrible situations as bad working environments, conditions, and child labour like there was 10 or more years ago. So that's a really good thing. And obviously we as the customer or the client has to wear that price. I know now when I go into China and work with my factories, it's an incredible environment. A lot of just so you know and understand, a lot of the workers come from out of the city areas, and they come from the country areas. And I know a couple of my factories offer accommodation, so they actually have to, by law, give them lodgings, accommodation, and 3 meals a day. So they get fed and accommodation plus paid for their work. They don't work on Sundays. They most tend to work 6 days a week, and then they get the pay a really big leave in Chinese New Year for their major holiday. Like our Christmas break, it's their Christmas break. So when manufacturing offshore, you also must remember the holidays of each country, the religious holidays, and being in different Asian countries, there's different religious holidays. China being the biggest, I guess, with the Chinese New Year, which almost closes for a month, which generally falls about January, February, so after our Christmas. Obviously, if you're working out of Bali, you've got the Muslim as well, and the Hindu religious ceremonies and holidays that you have to take into account. So quite often, and India, so quite often it closes for some time. So when working with the factory, I would suggest also finding out when their holidays and their dates that their workers will not be there, because they do not coincide with our holidays. And it can make for a bit of frustration if you're not prepared. So that's why a timeline is also extremely important, and committing to a timeline and getting your factory to commit to a timeline is paramount prior to manufacturing. So that's a couple of the things for offshore. The same thing with local. I would also be doing the same sort of thing as far as timeline, making sure that they can commit to it. Finding out things like what they need up front. Is it deposits? Generally, in most offshore, it's a 50% deposit down on order, and then you would be looking at the balance prior to production being left. As with everything now, there's charges for sampling and research and development of your sample. So when you're doing beginning stages and you're working with an offshore company, manufacturing company, there are charges for those, as there are very much so you'll find in Australia. So hopefully that's been a little bit of help with offshore and local manufacturing. I think it's really as I said in the beginning, I think it really depends on your label, what you're producing, what you want to look at, something that you feel that you've already found the fabric in Australia, then it's probably worth the pursuing. I think probably one of the hardest things is getting the fabrics that you want, especially in the woven worlds. I mean, there are opportunities out there, but I know I'm looking deeply now into sustainability and trying to find good organic sustainable fabrics for almost everybody I'm working with, and that's really exciting. It's so exciting that this is just starting to happen. I don't think it's happening fast enough, but it is happening, and that's really exciting. So that's another area which I think will just boom. And then again, I think if you're working in that area, there is a possibility of working with factories in Australia, or making sure that you work with ethically certified factories offshore. Yeah, so I guess just to wrap up, I would say definitely look at both areas. Depending on what you want to get manufactured, it would be worth a discussion. I'm happy to advise each of my clients where I would suggest they go. I don't rule out either. And it's really great that I'm working with a couple of clients who adamantly want to work in Australia, which is really opening up some doors for when we're researching where to produce and what we need. So there are, like I was saying earlier, there are in every major city would be a larger manufacturer. I know there's in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. So if you wanted a factory situation, there are factory situations, but like I said, it's not always a one-stop shop. So that's the disadvantage, probably one of the disadvantages with working locally, plus the price. That's really important. You have to really get that established first. And then the advantages of working locally would be possibly easier to control, especially if you want to be really hands-on. You've got that Made in Australia label. If that's extremely important to you, then that's what you'll have. And you'll be supporting local. The advantages of working offshore is that you will probably have a better price point. It will be a one-stop shop. So whoever you work with will be the person that can find you all the components for your garment, and even to the fact of packaging and sending it flat packed. And the disadvantages of probably working offshore would be the higher minimums, possibly longer lead times, and at this stage working in the American dollar. Working in China and working with the American dollar, which is a bit tricky at the moment. So hopefully that's helped you tonight, and this is going to be the one of many that we're going to have. And thank you everyone for all your support. I've had lots of texts and emails, and that's really lovely. As clients would know who have met me and are working with me, I love to chat about this industry, and I've been in it long enough that I feel like I've got a really good understanding and still working on it. So I'm actually also, for those who don't know, I'm off to China in September for a week. I'm going to be taking a couple of clients and working over there for a couple of days for a couple of clients. So if anybody else is interested, or you have anyone that's interested in looking at some factories and a sourcing trip, that will be coming up very soon, and I'm open to taking anyone who's very keen to learn more. So I'll just say if there's any questions, but I think everyone's okay. Everyone's kind of muted themselves. So if you don't feel like unmuting yourself, I just want to say thanks for jumping on. I know it's really difficult at times at night to jump on board and get away, but I will have a look and see how this is going, and I might even see if there's other times that suit, or that we can just have these chats a bit more frequently. Yeah, please feel free to invite any of your friends as well, and recommendations are always very much appreciated, as are my clients. So I wish you a really lovely evening. Good luck with your label, all the best. I know things are going well, we're all at different stages, but it's exciting, things are happening, and I'm very grateful to be part of your label. So thank you, and good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. See you.
Bye.
You.